So there are a lot of discussion about fake news, all the issues about the media losing trust of their audience, but there are also other issues. That's what Ulrik Haagerup is saying, that sometimes media are just showing the very extreme version of the events in the globe, so a lot of people are just more frightened. That should be on what's going on in this planet. We're speaking obviously about migration, terrorist attack and everything. And Ulrik used to be the for 10 years, used to run the news desk at the Danish public broadcaster, used to run the largest Danish quality paper, but now is a CEO and the founder of the Constructive Institute, dealing with the kind of a new journalism, or maybe not new. But my first question is, I think that's usual, that everybody starts with that. What are these constructive news? I think every single interview started with that, because we in Ukraine, in particular our team at Hromadske, we're trying to do like solution journalism. But as soon as we start to talk about that, people say like, aren't you critical? So you would like to show this positive news? At the same time, we also often very much criticize for every single negative news, because Ukraine is undergoing reforms and people saying like, you are undermining the reforms. And sometimes we need to say that things don't work. So what's the balance?
So of course we do. And it's a perfect right question to ask. And when I started to talk about what I label constructive news, I had to spend the first half an hour to tell people what was not. Because every journalist that feel criticized will stonewall it and think, if you criticize me, it's because you don't want my critical questions. Or you just want to do North Korean version of journalism, where you paint the sky blue and ignore problems. Constructive journalism is not about ignoring problems. It's about documenting problems, important problems, not exaggerating them, not trying to get the eyeballs from people by going into this battle for attention and just talk about things that are wrong in order to make you look here, if it's not necessary that you look here. But go into document problems, but then take the next step, which is asking about what now and how. Those are questions that I didn't learn in journalism school, and almost no journalists learn about these questions, which are questions leading towards the future. So constructive journalism is basically about the future, meaning now we know this, but how do we solve it? What have other cities done? What did other governments do? What did other schools do in order to improve education? How do we solve the problem, and how can we do it? So that's what constructive journalism is about. It's about potential solutions. It's about sometimes facilitating a debate. It's about giving nuances to the picture. There's a tendency in our profession that either we angle the story on the black or on the white, the crook or the hero. But sometimes reality is blurry in the middle. The 50 shades of gray is sometimes the most interesting. But that doesn't fit into the news criteria. So that's what constructive news is about.
At the same time, you know, it sounds very nice. And as a journalist who trying to do something, as in our team which is trying to do something, we struggling. It shouldn't be boring, but also that kind of stories are not often the most popular. So how we really work with the audience? I know it should be engaging, but what are the tools? How you do that engaging?
But it's actually just something we think that it is boring. Actually, if you ask people, what do they want? Especially women, especially young people, especially young women, they hate the narrative of traditional news, where we constantly focus on the most extreme, the most dramatic, and the most things full of conflict. And people in growing numbers turn their backs on traditional news because they don't like the narrative of it. And they think we exaggerate, it makes them fearful and apathic. And it's not boring to talk about what could we do. Do you have any ideas on how we should solve it? Look what they did over here. Stories about hope, stories about inspiration, stories about potential solutions. How can we think that's boring? And it shows that news organizations implementing this actually experience that people read these stories more than traditional stories about suicide bombs in countries far away. They read them to the end. They spend more time on them. And they share them more on social media. And you see that everywhere when news organizations experiment with this, and to their surprise, they find out the audience like it. And of course they like it, because we as human beings, we don't want to be scared all the time. We also want stories about hope and potential's way out. And that's what we should do. Not stop being critical, not stopping keeping power accountable. That's, people want us to do that in a trustworthy way. But they also want us to take the next step. Finish the circle of investigative reporting. Talk about the problem, document it, and not stopping saying, okay, who's to blame for it? Yeah, that's interesting, but the most interesting thing for society and for people is, how is it being solved? How can we avoid this to happen again? And that's what constructive journalism is about.
At the same time, you say like the news showing the negative part, sometimes too extreme. But what we feel also with this audience feeling that they are that the media are out of touch, it's, for instance, the Trump voters who said that the liberal media cover up the issue with immigration. You remember the story, which was definitely overdone, about the so-called like New Year rape in Cologne, when a lot of media said, well, a lot of people said like, no, but the German media, they really didn't cover that, and that's pushes a lot of social media users to read something else, because they don't want to have this kind of politically correct version of the reality. So how we deal with that?
Yeah, but that's another issue, and it's very important too. I saw a survey the other day that 73% of German citizens do not trust traditional media's way of covering immigrant issues. 73%. I mean, that's not a small minority. It's the big majority of the population do not trust traditional media to really tell the truth about what's going on. Are they right or are they wrong? Or are they just, can it be that some of it is true, that there's something wrong in the way we have done it? Look to France, for instance. The French media, in partnership with the French elite political system, for 25 years ignored a movement called Front National, who were very, very critical towards immigration into France, because they were afraid of fueling fascism. So they basically tried to ignore them. As a consequence, they built a materium for this movement, and they were second in the presidential election last year. You see it in Sweden, where the Swedish Democrats, they're growing, because the Swedish media, Swedish journalists, Swedish publishers, and Swedish traditional political parties have tried to ignore any criticism of the consequence of immigration from people with a different cultural background. And the problem with that, especially if we're a public service company or journalist publishers claiming that we give people the best obtainable version of the truth, if we use our personal preferences as guidance to what we filter, who we like, who we don't like, then we break the contract between the media and the public, saying we filter the news in such a way that you can trust us, because we want just to give you the version, the best obtainable version of what's going on, and in order for you to make up your own mind. If they don't believe that, because they feel that either we just want to make money on them, or we want to use our journalism to influence their mindset so they think the way we think, then they feel manipulated. So I think it's extremely dangerous, both things, that we try to not really to be fair, balanced, accurate, but just try to ask people, look here, breaking news, look here, all the time, in order to, you shouldn't look over there, you should look here. On the one side and the other side, we filter reality based on our own preferences, and that's not journalism, that's politics, and that's activism, and that's fine with that, but don't call it journalism then.
So then clarify, because sometimes we often hear that, especially, as I said, like in Ukraine, when there would be some people representing, for instance, either the government or who's saying that, you know, there are too much negativity about the way media portrayed the reforms, but we know that there are loopholes in the way they are sometimes conducted. But the demand is really to not to point out the negative stories, but sometimes the negative stories are there. Earthquakes, terrorist attacks, they're just there, and of course there is a natural intention of the human to go for these unusual things. That's what the news are about. That. So how we work with this human instinct to look at these extremes.
Yeah, but to make it perfectly clear, I think, of course, we should cover terrorism. I think we should cover earthquakes. We should tell people what's going on. That's a big part of journalism. I don't know about you, but I think most journalists went to journalism school and learned there were two pillars of journalism talking about news. One, when I was young, it wasn't called breaking news, it was just called news. But the idea of that covering events as fast as technology allows you. Asking what happened, where did it happen, blah, 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 all that. And we play the role of a police car or ambulance in rolling out to the event, and we angle the story on conflict and drama. The more drama, the better. The more conflict, the better. For any society and for any citizens, it's important somebody filters the world with that. So important issues doesn't happen and you don't know about it. So it's very important. Then there's the second one we learned about. That's the investigative journalism, which is keeping power accountable. It is the watchdog. It is controlling people, asking the critical questions. But basically, and that's very important for society. What's happening right now is a lot of newsrooms, they cut down on that because it's costly. It costs a lot of money. It takes time. So they cut down on that and put it over to a new platform to do breaking news. We have to do Snapchat news also now. But this is very important that we do that in society. But what is investigative stories actually? It's always about yesterday. It's about who is to blame for the problems we're in. So we ask, who did it? Why did it happen? And we angle the stories on the crooks and the victim. What I'm talking about is the consequence of us journalists filtering the world, only talking about now and yesterday. Only talking about conflict and drama, crooks and victims. So if we only filter that, then the public debate will be about now and yesterday. But what is politics about? Politics is about tomorrow. But that doesn't fit into our news criteria. We don't want to listen to your ideas, your plans, your visions, your ideology, but we would like to, you have that idea. Now look, we have found this clip where you say something different 4 years ago. Does that mean you have been wiser, or what was happened? Were you stupid then? And and now we have invited the person from a different political party who hates you, and we ask you, what do you think about his idea? And he will say, it's the most stupid idea I've ever heard. What do you think about him saying that you are stupid? And then we have a fight. And that's what we do instinctively because we think that's our job. But no, it's not our job. We enhance the conflict. We should look at the problem, but then take the next step. And that's what I'm talking about, the next pillar of journalism. Not as an alternative, but an add-on, talking about tomorrow, talking about inspiration and angle on best practice and solution, asking now what and how. So, and what we do also with this kind of a dramatic idea about the world in perils. I mean, you know, for instance, there's this Swedish scholar Hans Rosling who really put it into a lot of data showing that the things are wrong. Yes. So, what the people should know? What is wrong, for instance, by the way, Danish people see the world, French people see the world, Ukrainians see the world. I mean, what's going on? So what are the most important things? Probably our audience now would be like, oh, it's not. I mean, we should know that you and I, we are in the profession where we filter the world for people. But what happened, and if we say to ourselves, we do it so we give people the best obtainable version of what's out there. But if we actually only focus on things that do not work, on the conflict and drama, people would start thinking that's the way the world is. So we are the filter between reality and the public perception of the reality. And people make decisions in politics, in wars, in conflict, and when they vote, not based on fact, but on what they think are the facts. So this is important. And what is happening right now, all over the world, including in your country and in my country, is that the gap between the two fact and people's perception of the facts are growing by the day. People think that the world is falling apart, when the fact is that the world has never been a better place, despite of all the problems, but it's never been better. One example, in the history of mankind, never has so few people died in wars as in 2018 and 17. Never. Despite of Syria, despite of conflict areas such as yourself. Never. But people don't know that. Why? Because we, of course, sent reporter teams to cover the wars that are there, and of course we should do that. But we don't talk about all the peace. People live longer, another example. People live longer than ever, but people think that we talk about all the terrible things happening to us. More people now die of diabetes than from starvation in Africa. People think in Europe and in Ukraine that Africa is still terrible, it's going down. There are countries in Africa with a growth rate in GDP bigger than China's 10 years in a row. But we never sent reporter teams to Rwanda or Burundi. But we sent reporter teams to cover the Ebola crisis or the starvation if some interest group will pay for the flight ticket. And I'm not saying we shouldn't cover the problem, and there are a lot of problems in Africa, but the big picture in Africa is life is improving rapidly.
And coming back to your position, for instance, at the previous position at the Danish news, to what extent you were doing that? And I give an example, of course, a lot of Ukrainians are, I would use this word, pissed off by the way the world see Ukraine. Because sometimes there is a conflict, but all the stories are about either corruption
Yes.
or the war. And all the ambassadors, all the foreigners living in Ukraine said, like, that's not at all Ukraine, we know, it's totally different the way it looks. So they really... but in that way, when, for instance, reporters from the Danish public broadcaster were coming to Ukraine, there were some of them, were they really spending time somewhere else, apart from the conflict zone? You know, how was it feasible even in your position? Because I've met you at the event where you still were running the news, yeah? So where you were still in power to do the news differently. How successful you were in showing the countries in a different way? And what was the obstacles?
I think we were rather successful in the end, but it's very difficult to change the mindset of yourself, very difficult to change the mindset of others, especially with others were saying, oh, you don't want me to point my camera on the conflict, only on the nice children? Yeah, that's it, that's not journalism. No, I want to give an accurate picture of the situation in Ukraine. I remember a few years ago, we sent a reporter crew to Pakistan, for instance, with the idea we would like to know, because we were sitting talking, we didn't know, and the Danish population didn't know, how do they eat breakfast? Do they sit on floors at the floor? Do they get breakfast? We have this picture of Pakistan with dusty roads and skinny cows and suicide bombers running around all over the place. But what's the normality, what's the norm in a country like Pakistan? And the same thing with Ukraine. If we only show corruption and prostitutes and fighting in eastern part of your country, then people in our country will think that's the way it is everywhere. If we never show normal life, people go to school, fantastic economy, beautiful nature, whatever, if we don't show that, and I'm not talking about that we should paint a glossy picture, we should just tell how it is, because that's interesting. Journalism is showing something out of the ordinary. And if people have a mindset of everything is terrible, then this good story will be a story about things actually going well here.
How do you deal with the money issue in that regard in the commercial media? Because, you know, clickbaiting news, that's how you earn the money. So in a structural way, what you do, are the public broadcasters the ways out? Or really, we have a lot of public broadcasters.
Can I please question that notion? Because I know it's there. We have to do clickbait. That's the only way we can make people watch, and so we can get advertisers' money. Does that strategy really work? No, it doesn't. Google and Facebook, they now have 85% of all digital advertising in the world. And they will probably get more. So thinking that you will make a living and can finance good journalism based mainly on advertising, based on clickbait, that is really peeing in your pants, because it might be warm for a while, but then it's not really comfortable. So you really have to think about, as a strategy, if you do what you always have done, you probably end up with the results you always gotten. And our results are not very good. If you think you can make a living of giving people what they can get everywhere, how will price go? If there's a big demand, a big supply, then the price will go towards zero. And that's why we can't get money for traditional news. People don't want to pay for it, because if you want to charge here, it's free there. So we have to climb the ladder of value, creating journalism that creates meaning, that's engaging, that gives people something they need and long for, which is someone to trust, someone who will, with passion, really try to do good for society.
Where do you see the place of the big tech, the companies like Facebook and Google, who really are dominating in the media sphere? And now, even here, there are more discussion now about these companies rather than some of the governments. How we deal with them? Do media should cooperate with them? Or?
It's a very big issue, because news media have really been part of the success of Facebook, because we gave the content to Facebook and they made the money on the content, and now we don't really know. But on the other hand, that was where the customers were. So how do we do it? I think the internet happened. It's there. It's not Google and Facebook killing media. They are just very, very efficient ways for people to interact with each other and get advertising out to people where they are, so they easily can find the car they want to buy. It's better to go on the web than buy a newspaper if you want to buy a car and get an overview where's the best and cheapest. So I think we have to be in a dialogue with these companies. And I think we also, in that dialogue, must try to help them to take responsibility, persuade them to see that they are media companies, their algorithms are the new editors, and we as public, we need to have a transparency so we know and can find out how do they filter the world for us. And we need to know that. I think deeply that the new human right for people on planet Earth should be the right to get trusted information and know why is this filtered the way it is for me. It's not enough to have freedom of speech. Following the freedom of speech should be the responsibility to do it in a trusted manner.
And how you deal then with the whole notion of the fake news and disinformation, which is also happening?
It's happening.
It's happening, so we can't also undermine that.
Of course.
So what are the effective, efficient way to deal with that?
First of all, teach people. First of all, let democratic institutions fight it. I mean, how can we accept that there are state-owned or state-controlled factories of trolls trying to manipulate other countries' way of thinking? That's a terrible thing. It's Roundup for democracy, and if that's why they do it, they should stop immediately and be banned for doing it, and be out of the good company doing that. But I just have to say that fake news is really a big issue, but it's not the biggest. The way you and I, as journalists, filter the world in traditional media is by far has far more impact than of the way people think about themselves and the world than fake news and misinformation, which has always been there, is just now much more efficient with social media. So I don't think we should ignore it. I think we should combat it, but I think there's something we can do something about easily, which is the way you and we work and our colleagues work, the way we think about our job, the way we think about our role in society. We need to take responsibility, and if we do, people will reward us for that, because then they will turn to us to get the right filter of it. And that's also a way of combating fake news.
And my last one is also about solution. As somebody who used to work for the public broadcaster, if we rethink the public broadcaster in the digital time, because earlier it was clear, you do a television and it covers a lot of people, so you have multiple different views. Now we speak all the time about the bubbles. So how you make the bubbles meet in the digital way, especially even like people with these polar views?
that's coming back to public broadcasting. What is that actually? Why do we have it, and do we need it in modern times? A lot of people say, oh, it's from the old days. We don't need it. Everybody has access to everything all the time, so we don't need these people. When I travel around the world and see media and democracies work and dysfunction, I don't fly back to my country thinking that we need less public service. What is public service? Public service is the idea that we want to glue the country together. Telling somebody who tells stories to everybody about us. How are we in the world, and filter it, not targeting to a specific group all the time, creating these bubbles, but being one of the few media who insist on, because that's the job, building bridges, telling stories of people from that part of the country, that part of the world that otherwise we wouldn't hear about. Because it might not be commercially interesting, or it's not about you. No, it's about them, and it's about us. Doing stories about us, and not only stories about you. That's the purpose of public service. And we need more of that. And we need governments, meaning people, to understand how important it is. The market cannot sustain this, especially because the advertising model is being eroded. It's not existing, almost. So we need to find other ways of filtering. There are two ways. If you can't have people pay directly or indirectly by advertising, then it's philanthropy. That's how your organization tried to be funded also. And then some kind of license fee or tax, meaning everybody is forced, because this is a public good, to pay a little so everybody can get a lot. So I'm a strong believer in public service. I'm a strong believer in journalism. I think we have been part of the problem, but we need to be part of the solution.